Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Monday, February 12th, 2018, and this is our weekly POTUS report with Dr. Jim Fetzer, and we have Jim with us. How are you, Jim?
Under the weather.
You are indeed, my friend. I'm sorry to see that. But I think poor Jim has the chemtrail flu. Everybody's had it. It's really going around. Stay hydrated, Jim. Just drink lots of vitamin C, take that OJ, and we'll try to get through this report. And this is not slowing you down. This is amazing. You're amazing. What a trooper. Folks, we have a lot to talk about today, and we're going to start with going to screen share the GoldFish Report news page on Facebook. What we have is President's schedule today. He's meeting with state and local officials about his infrastructure initiative. He's meeting with Vice President Mike Pence, and he's having lunch with Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. I hope they're going to talk about getting rid of Common Core, which I think they are, because I'm pretty sure Betsy DeVos is in favor of doing away with Common Core. So that's the schedule for POTUS today. What's interesting, one of the first news stories that I wanted to talk about is this flight that's been brought to my attention. This is United Airways, and you can see it took off from Joint Base Andrews in DC and arrived in Guantanamo Bay, and here's the flight path. Yay! So who do you think's on that flight? It was quite a large plane. It could hold about 278 people, approximately about that number. I don't know if it was full. We don't know exactly the extent of who was on it, but I can guess. Can you guess, Jim? Wishful thinking.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah, wishful thinking for sure. And let me tell you, folks, Q is all over this, and there's a lot of very interesting messages from Q. We're going to take a look at this page right now. This is today's post, actually. Chris Wallace looks clean as far as those descriptors used by Q are concerned, looking into Chris Matthews. They're referring to some of the news broadcasters in mainstream media. And what he's trying to show is that there's, Jim, we've talked about this before, Operation Mockingbird, which took control of the media. And we're trying to, really look and see who the main players are. From what I understood from previous reports, that there was really somebody from the CIA positioned in these main newsrooms to make sure to control the narrative of the reports that were coming out.
Are you kidding me?
No, not at all.
CNN has 100 members that are U.S. Israeli citizens. It's all CIA all the time.
Right.
Chris Wallace is clean, but Chris Matthews is not, nor is Rachel Maddow, nor is Lawrence O'Donnell, nor is most of the mainstream media, Louisa. There's no doubt about it.
This is an interesting picture here because although I don't know, actually it's very small, we can't really see it that good, but it does show that's not Xi Jinping. This is the I think the commander of the communist China. You have Bill Clinton, and what you have here are the members. These are what I believe to be the New World Order members who are trying to continue to promote this. Benjamin Fulford had a report today indicating that the communist China, North Korea, and I believe even England, if I'm not mistaken, are trying to push through this New World Order agenda. I don't really know. It looks like it's like Trump versus New World Order, where they want to have a one world religion, a one world government, and then they can, carry out their more massive mass depopulation agenda. So we want to really look out for that.
Benjamin Fulford's initials may be BF, but it sounds to me like a lot of BS.
It's a good one, Jim. I like that. Yeah. Oh, it says the Vatican, Chinese Communist Party, British Empire, and the Pentagon Plan World Government. And so he's, that's according to him and his Asian secret society sources and his P2 Freemason sources. I don't know. I think it may be true that they're planning it, but whether they succeed, I don't think they're going to succeed.
China, North Korea, and England? Louisa.
The Vatican. We've reported about the Vatican before, Jim. I mean, this is not surprising because the Vatican kind of controls all of this. And what people don't understand is how it controls all of that. Let's keep going and taking a look at Q's posts. This is from today. He's talking about the inner circle. So we're looking at Mika Brzezinski. This is all about the media here. The background, what's the family, the careers, McLean, Virginia. The age of tech has really hurt their ability to hide and control. Majority today were born into the circle. So there's actually some that don't want to be in that circle. I happen to know some, and but they have insight into how it's structured and how it's run. He says, investigate those in front of the camera who scream the loudest. These people are really stupid. The end is near. The media cleanse, JFK. When we started doing our reports, Jim, I had a feeling that that President Trump was going to finish the job JFK didn't get to start. This is what he's trying to do, it appears to me. And so we also had a tribute to him from Q as well. And so it looks like, without getting into all the detail, I don't think all the details are necessary as much as we look at the overall operation. And what it looks like is we're dealing with taking down Mockingbird right now, Operation Mockingbird, because without it, there's no way to really get the information out to the American people or even internationally. And speaking of the people, there's other posts that are related to this, and it might be a little bit concerning. Because they have this 60-40 plan here. Here's the post from yesterday. It says, public information and collapse. Q, there is one thing that concerns me somewhat related to, this is one of the Anon's comments to Q's post, somewhat related to this, but more related to 60-40. The less the public knows, the more likely they are to falsely assign blame in the future, possibly even generations now. It's worth keeping in mind. The problem with this, so the 60-40, okay, it's like 60% of the information, the disclosure information about what's really going on in the government and the world is going to be kept confidential, and only 40% is going to be revealed to the people. Now, quite frankly, I think that we're not going to see change unless we have full disclosure. So I personally think that it needs to all come out, and probably the sooner the better. I mean, who's to say that the 40%, what part of that 40% or what part of that 60%, I don't know who's screening it and deciding what goes into the 40% and what stays in the 60% part. You know what I mean? But this was very interesting because Q had posted here one simple fact: the U.S. is connected to the rest of the world. Knowing that, understand by default, if certain intel is released, it would cause a worldwide mass suffering. Okay, so we share the idea of open source, but value life and must make decisions based on outcomes and containability. This is a military. I've always kind of held that this is a military source behind Q, or that who Q is, and this kind of supports that, in my opinion. Another Anon had mentioned, I hope someday patriots, vets, and Anons get the respect that we deserve. Marine Anons have felt betrayed by the same people we were willing to die to protect. This is so heartbreaking. I felt lost until you showed up in October. Thank you from the depths of my heart. You might want to mute, Jim. Oh, you poor thing. You might want to mute when you feel that cough coming on. Thanks. Okay, we are with you. So Q posted a response to this saying, we are with you, Patriot. We honor your service to our great country. Without people like you, the world would be lost. Godspeed. So we know that the military, and look, Q's talking about military. Q's talking about the vets. He's talking about patriots. He's talking about honoring and respecting people who served and not making their sacrifices, and they continue to make them even though they're off the battlefield, not in vain. It was for a good cause. It's for the right reason ultimately, even though at the time there could be questions about that, like whether we were there liberating or occupying, so to speak. Of course, so on the 11th, Q continues with other posts talking about how long. So he's also talking about big pharma, and he's talking about exposing big pharma. Um, I think the president actually made an announcement, don't get the flu shot. He actually said that because it's contaminated, it's got things in it, it's making people sick. There's reports all over the country that kids who are getting the flu shot are dying. So you really have to take this seriously, folks. We have Melania Trump, who has been outspoken about, she's an anti-vaxxer, and we should have the right to choose and not have it forced on us. So that's some of the things that we are looking at with Q. He's talking about Huma Abedin again, and Huma Abedin, HAHA. So there was some very interesting things going on, and of course we also have some posts here. Okay, now here we can, as I just screen shared for our viewers, United Airlines to Guantanamo Bay, what airline check encounter? So he's talking about what is the location, why is this relevant? So we know, so here we have Q confirming this event, this news event that I pulled up to share with our viewers in the beginning of the video. So this is not a coincidence, folks. Here it says, what a coincidence that he's saying it, I think, sarcastically. So we're going to keep going because we're talking about people. We have John McCain in this photo here talking with ISIS mercenaries. So we really have, he's a traitor. I believe he's a traitor to our country. And I think there's many people who are starting to see that as well. That's basically from my reports. We have Q talking about Snowden, and if he was still a clown, and that Q's reference to CIA has been clowns in America. So if he's still CIA, why would it be important he was in Russia and learn? So Jim, I didn't know if you had any comments on that, because you might know a little bit more insight on the whole Russia relationship. But if he was CIA,
I have long believed that Snowden was a good guy. So if he turned out not to be, that's disillusioning to me.
Yeah, I can't imagine that this man would risk being killed and his family, being harmed to do what he did. I'm sure he'd prefer not living in Russia. Maybe he wants to. Maybe he was a defector. Maybe he was planning on relinquishing his citizenship, but I don't think so, because he has stated many times he wanted to see his family, and there has been an effort to try to bring him back with amnesty. That's not going to happen probably for a long time, but I certainly hope so. We have another post that is relating to, I'm not going to go over all the Q stuff. I am going to, here it is, timestamp at Snowden, truth to power, drop truth to power, learn Q. Maybe that's a sign for him to do something. Might want to mute that. That might be a sign, actually, for Snowden. Snowden might be watching these Q boards. So, and of course, I think Julian Assange is watching them as well, if not even participating in it in some way, which has also been a theory of mine. I do think it's the military, but I think Julian Assange is definitely part of this somehow. What we have is a terrible story also about this Russian plane crash, and this is a list of people who were on it. The former Deputy Director General of Rosatom, who was involved in Uranium One, dead from this plane crash. And he also worked in Russia. So we have, more dead body count showing up for the Clinton Foundation interests. And, it's almost, it's sad that someone's life is taken, but it's almost a joke that, where's the mainstream? The mainstream media, of course, would never cover this. They suppress this. But at some point,
you think this might be Clinton's cleaning up their witness list?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They can't prosecute people if they're, dead men tell no lies. So I heard that from somewhere before. Okay, so he also wants to I don't know where that one. There's Q's been posting a lot. He's been very, very busy. And one of the posts that I wanted to talk about was that he had said there was going to be more and be prepared for more emergency broadcast system messages. So just so I put that out there for folks so you don't really become alarmed. I think what they're doing, Jim, is they're really trying to be very strategic and really trying to not cause a panic. But, you know, most people are so, I would say, apathetic because, you know, they've been dosed with lithium and barium and strontium from chemtrails in the water. The water system has high levels of antidepressants in it. We know that also from the fish, because the fish have been coming up testing very high for antidepressants as well. We've been, you know, our let's see, the water, the fluoridation of the water, and of course the genetically modified food. They're really trying to cause harm to us. And folks, if you really think the government wouldn't do that, why aren't they protecting us? Why aren't they stopping it? So there's your answer. There's a lot to go over with Q, and like I said, I think the details are not, unless you have to know every detail, but the overall picture is that there's operations going on, and yes, we want to see more evidence of it. And I just showed evidence of what's going on with who's going down to Guantanamo Bay. We also know that Trey Gowdy is resigning from Congress, and he had said publicly and stated publicly that his love and his passion is really in prosecution. So my bet is on Trey Gowdy that he is going to be prosecuting these cases in a military tribunal. I think now it's been circulating on the internet long enough to know that that's what's going to happen. We're going to have military tribunals because our court system is not cleaned up yet. There's way too many sympathizers with the Soros agenda of dividing America and you know, causing racial tensions and racial hatreds. And what's so sad is that, you know, 2 years ago, you know, when I first started GoldFish Report, this didn't exist. We were just peaceful people, and it's amazing. And they must be sitting back laughing. I'm going to take this off of screen share for a minute. But they must be sitting back laughing, Jim, at how programmable people are, how easy it is to lead these sheep into the slaughterhouse, to lead people into these, and they know all they have to do is dangle money, because, you know, we've reported with all of your false flag books and your false flag research, how easy it is to get crowds on demand to go and, you know, fake a tragic event. And they use that to feed, because they're satanic in nature. So they use that negative fear energy. They live off of it. And make no mistake, these people who are involved in child trafficking and who are doing this, it's all about the energy. It's all about the fear. It's all about harvesting this energy, because they're black. It's called black magic. And whether you want to believe it, and you really need to sit down and swallow this pill, because it's the world we're living in. And if you don't, it's going to come crashing down around you pretty soon, because Trump is really working on this. So I just wanted to kind of bring up those points today at the top of the program, which is kind of our new format, where I kind of present some of the latest POTUS agendas and Q updates. And then then Jim kind of goes into his slides with the other news that we both comment on. So Jim, if you'd like to, let me take you off of mute. Okay, if you'd like to start your stories, I'm ready to go.
Absolutely. Mattis dismisses fear of wider war after massive Syria strike, killing in excess of 100 Syrian pro-government forces. This strikes me as an incredibly stupid thing to have done. Mattis said the killings were simple self-defense for an alleged Syrian attack half a kilometer away from a base where U.S. troops were positioned. He said Congress would know if the U.S. were entering a new conflict because they'd attack first, not respond. There's been another major escalation, with Israel carrying out a large-scale attack on Syria after an Israeli F-16 was shot down. The condition of the pilot, who was seriously injured after he was forced to evacuate the plane, stabilized Saturday, but he was still unconscious and connected to a respirator. The Israelis are becoming more aggressive, but they've been shot down by Russian-made Syrian missiles. As reported earlier, a major battle broke out Saturday between the Israeli Air Force and Syrian Air Defense Force over the occupied Golan region, South Lebanon, and the West Damascus region. During the confrontation that lasted for hours, Israeli warplanes and Syrian anti-aircraft systems traded missile fire. Literally dozens of such munitions were fired as the latter launched a general attack against Iranian regime bases west of Damascus. Israeli warplane downed by Russian-made anti-aircraft missile. Israeli Air Force Chief Tomer Bar revealed the F-16 intercepted following strike in Syria was likely shot down by a barrage of surface-to-air missiles from Syrian armed forces made and supplied by Russia. You can see what appears to be one of the missiles impaled in the ground below. This is a significant escalation. Also, because the U.S. strikes in Syria has involved Russian forces, the Pentagon unleashed devastating firepower against the pro-government fighters on the pretext they were mounting an attack against the headquarters of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the U.S. proxy ground force dominated by the Syrian Kurds. U.S. Special Forces directing the activities of the Kurds were stationed at the headquarters, carried out in the zone of influence carved out by the U.S. intervention in near Ezor, northeast of the Euphrates River. Bombs and missiles were rained down on the force, which reportedly included between 300 and 500 infantry backed by tanks and artillery, U.S. F-15 fighter jets, Apache helicopters, C-130 gunships, and unmanned drones. That's a massive assault, Louisa.
Right.
And it is, in my opinion, going to bring about a response by Russia that will not be something welcomed by the United States. Unsubstantiated claims from Washington and Paris that the Syrian government with Russian support has carried out attacks using chlorine against the civilian population are being used to create conditions for a fresh military intervention against the Syrian government. They've used this gas attack thing again and again and again, Louise. It has no basis. In fact, Assad and the Syrian government gave up their ability to even manufacture these weapons long since. So, frankly, it's insulting that we're being told these completely fanciful stories.
Jim, I mean, I just think that Trump doesn't have control over these things because there are reports that there are, now this might be a shock to some viewers, but to some it won't be, but it is reported that there are portals in these locations, and this is what the fighting is about. We're talking about off-world situation here. We're not talking about on the planet. We're talking about things that this is part of disclosure. This is part of what they don't want to release yet, but full disclosure has to happen. There's portals there. This is in Iraq and Syria, the Gulf of Oman and Oman, and it's very serious, and this is why they're still fighting. And honestly, you really think that it's just about religion? It's not. It's about control of the portals. It ties into CERN, it ties into what CERN's really doing and how CERN is affecting, well, you know, we can't have this conversation right now. We'll get into it another time.
Or alternatively, it has to do with pipelines and the emergence of China as a superpower and wanting to develop commercial routes through Iran and Syria into Russia, Eurasia, and Europe. Turkey's invasion against the Kurds is getting bogged down. They have a rising death toll. They've run into problems with the mountains and the mud. It's pretty striking where the Syrian government is quietly backing the Kurds against Turkey. This is, we got the potential here for World War III. I mean, it's on a hair trigger, Louisa. Absolutely. There's just no question about it.
I thought Russia was behind, helping Syria. And they shot down that Israeli jet. So, I mean,
No, Russia's
I don't
helping
know why,
Syria, of course.
wonder why they're not in there doing a little bit more, but I don't know. We'll see. Keep on.
Israel preparing for war in the north, boosts air defenses, warns Iran one day after the most significant escalation in tensions between Israel, Syria, and Iran when an Israeli F-16 was shot down. It attacked the Syrian base, which allegedly had launched a drone into Israeli airspace. Israel appears to be preparing for war in the north, meaning carrying war against Iran. Here you see a map of what sketch of what allegedly took place. I do not believe there was any intrusion by Iran in the airspace. There are additional support forces for Israel. The Arrow system intercepting ballistic missiles outside of Earth's atmosphere, where David's Sling missile defense system used to intercept tactical ballistic missiles. This is all intended to show its ability to fend off an attack by Iran, except Iran is a peaceful nation that hasn't launched a war of aggression against any other nation since 1775. I mean, Israel is a known prevaricator, makes stuff up. While analysts said they didn't expect further escalation, some see the possibility of the Syrian war entering a new phase. We've yet to see how oil will trade after the tension-filled week, but Israel's stock dropped as much as 1.3% after Israel and Iran moved closer to confrontation in Syria. Meanwhile, Russia has stressed the need. After Saturday's escalation, Iran dismissed Israeli lies and said Syria had the right to defend itself against Israeli attacks. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Ghasem said Iran does not have a military presence in Syria and only sent military advisors at the request of the Syrian government. Meanwhile, Russia stressed the need to avoid any measure that could lead to a dangerous escalation. Netanyahu purportedly spoke with both Vladimir Putin and Rex Tillerson after Saturday's confrontation. And the Iranians are most certainly not going to back down. Iran has called the reports they sent an unmanned aerial vehicle into Israeli airspace ridiculous. An Iranian commander warns they could unleash hell on the Zionist regime by destroying all U.S. bases in the area. I'm confident he could fulfill that threat. Meanwhile, Russia's Putin warned Israeli Netanyahu to avoid escalating the situation, while Bibi asserts Israel's right to defend against aggression, which is what they claim every time they launch an act of aggression. They claim they're defending themselves against aggression. It turns out that Bibi is about to be indicted for corruption, and there are conflicting reports about whether he could remain in the office of prime minister once indicted. My suspicion is probably not, but I must acknowledge there are several articles debating this issue quite openly in the Israeli press.
Right. There were reports. I'm sorry, Jim, but there were reports that there was a lot of actually protests in Israel to address the corruption in the government, because I think the Israelis are starting to realize that they're not all homogeneous.
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
Now, here's a thoughtful article that the war with Iran has in fact already begun. The shadow war on for years is bringing closer to today's events and what is to come. Hezbollah is about to mark the 10th anniversary of the death of Imad Mughaya, its legendary and ruthless military commander, whose absence, according to Israeli intelligence, is still felt today. This guy, and they have several false claims about him here. The mastermind of the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, that was Israeli Mossad attacks against the Israeli embassy and the Jewish community center in Buenos Aires. Those were both Mossad ops. I've investigated and reported on those. False flags attacks in Argentina in 1992 and 1994. The Israelis blew up their own embassy. They claimed it was a car bomb for which Iran was responsible, but it was nonsense. It blew up from the inside out. When that didn't draw enough of public attention and sympathy, they blew up their own Jewish community center. So there were about 24 casualties from the first, about 84 from the second. This was all to punish Argentina for cooperating with Iran in the peaceful development of nuclear energy. The fact is, the Israelis foment, false flag attacks all over the world. Since the Iranians came to assist Assad in Syria, with Russia and ensured his survival, while Assad is in control of the majority of Syria, Iran is staying put and trying to establish a greater presence within the country. I think that may be a slight exaggeration, but the Israelis are paranoid because, after all, they participated in bringing us 9/11 or draw the United States into the Middle East to take out the modern Arab states that served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination and eventually to confront the Persian nation of Iran. But the fact that it hasn't worked out with regard to Syria, therefore, has become a major sore spot for Israel. Hence, they're undertaking all kinds of provocative action to try to turn this situation to their advantage. On the surface, it seems like Russia is taking Iran and Syria's side, not Israel, despite Prime Minister Netanyahu's best efforts to win over Putin in his countless meetings with the Russian president. Beyond the ministry statement's rhetorical significance, it could have practical consequences if Russia decides to deny Israel operational freedom over Syria in the future. Now, what's important about this article is this is from, as I recall, the Times of Israel. In other words, this is Israelis reflecting on the situation. Look at the last two paragraphs. Israel will have to tread carefully and will not have a lot of choice but to accept Moscow's directives. While Russia has allowed Iran to establish a presence in Syria, it has until now prevented it from setting up large bases or a presence right along the border with Israel on the Golan Heights. That could all still happen. It will depend on what Russia's interests will be when it comes to the future of Syria and the wider Middle East. So in other words, Israel is really acknowledging that this is the call for Vladimir Putin. Washington is doing its typical nonsense, suggesting that these incursions are because of Iran's calculated escalation when it's nothing of the kind. I'm sorry, but the United States disgraces itself again and again and again. And I'm not at all sure that this latest attack on the Syrian army is not going to have very, very substantial consequences adverse to the interests of the United States.
Well, again, I think that this is some foreign policy that's actually out of Trump's hands. I don't think just reporting that there's a phone call between Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Putin and Netanyahu doesn't tell us much of anything at all. It doesn't tell us what the goal is for, what's the agenda? What's his foreign policy agenda on this? They need to come out and be more clear about it. So
there's quite a thoughtful article here by Bob Urey about why Russian meddling is a Trojan horse. It's worth going through in some detail.
Right, I saw that report.
Prior to the 2000 presidency, if one were to ask what single act could seal a new Cold War with Russia, align liberals and progressives with the operational core of the American military-industrial surveillance complex, expose the preponderance of left activism as an offshoot of Democratic Party operations, and consign most of what remained to personal invective against an empirically dangerous leader, consensus would likely have that doing so wouldn't be easy. Most would say preposterous. The decision to blame Russia meddling for Hillary's loss was made in the immediate aftermath, as we've reported here many times. Robbie Mook and John Podesta made it up out of whole cloth. Within days, the received wisdom among the Clinton supporters was the election had been stolen. Trump was sent head of the White House as a pawn of the Russian political leadership. Left out was a history of U.S.-Russian relations, that the largest voting bloc in the 2016 election was eligible voters who didn't vote, and that domestic business interests substantially control the American electoral process. Here's a bar graph about how eligible voters voted, and the largest bloc didn't vote at all. Louisa, this is fairly stunning. And Republicans and Democrats, 30% didn't vote, 40%. Pretty fascinating.
Right.
More than a year later, no credible evidence has been put forward to establish that any votes were changed due to external meddling. As The Intercept has reported, since the election, progressive candidates seeking public office has been systematically subverted by establishment Democrats in favor of those with connections and big money donors. And the Democratic Party leadership in Congress just voted to give Trump expanded spying power with fewer constraints. Congressional Democrats are certainly behaving as if they believe Trump was duly elected, and more to the point, they're supporting his program. The choice of Russia would seem bizarre if not for the history. Residual propaganda from the first Cold War, itself largely a business enterprise that provided ideological cover for American imperial incursions, had it that substantive grievances against the American government in the form of protests were universally the product of external enemies intent on sowing discord to promote their own interests. Apparently, we can't have any legitimate protests of our own, Louisa, such as, through civil rights, organized labor, the anti-war movement, counterculturism. It's all got to have external manipulation. It can't be bona fide and authentically American, no matter how Americans may feel about the actions of their own country.
Absolutely, Jim. I mean, Standing Rock was a perfect example of that, where they had, missionary forces there. The DAPL had basically missionaries. I mean, we were, covering that as it was happening, and, they used a lot of weapons against people who were peacefully protesting. They didn't have weapons. So you're right. There's no such thing as having a protest in this country any longer.
Here's some absolutely crucial history that every American needs to appreciate. The choice by the Clintonites to invoke a new Cold War by bringing Russia into the American electoral mix is not without a pace. Students of history may recall in the early 1990s, Mikhail Gorbachev was given assurances by senior members of George H.W. Bush's administration. Actually, it was by Ronald Reagan's administration, where Lee Wanta negotiated the agreement that NATO would not be expanded to Russia's border in exchange for Russia's help reintegrating East and West Germany. It was Bill Clinton who unilaterally abrogated these assurances and moved nuclear-armed NATO to Russia's border. Bill Clinton. In 2013, the Obama administration brokered, Mr. Obama's term, a coup in the former Soviet state of Ukraine to oust the democratically elected president and install persons favorable to the interests of Western oligarchs. At the time, Hillary had just vacated her post as Secretary of State to prepare a run for president, but her lieutenants, including Victoria Nuland, were active in coordinating the coup and deciding who the new leadership of Ukraine ought to be. An analogy would be if Russia moved troops and weapons to the Mexican border with the U.S. after giving assurance it wouldn't do that, and then engineered a coup in Mexico to install a government friendly to the interests of the Russian political leadership. One need be sympathetic to Russian interests to understand that these are provocations. Given U.S. and Russian nuclear weapon stockpiles, the provocation seemed more reckless than tough. Then consider Mr. Obama's, later Trump's, move to upgrade the U.S. nuclear arsenal toward tactical use. This is to suggest that it certainly makes sense that the Russian political leadership would want to keep American militarists, also known as the Clintons and their neocon crazies, out of the White House. But as of now, the evidence is that the Russians changed no votes in the 2016 election. Indeed, I'm not even aware of any signs of any intervention whatsoever. As far as inciting dissent, this charge that protests were organized by Russian interests not only reeks of prior misdirection by the FBI and CIA, but there's no evidence any such protest had an impact on the outcome of the election.
Yeah, no, that's just, trying to still come up with an excuse for Hillary losing. Except for the fact that
it's just pathetic playing the American people. And
isn't it embarrassing, Jim? This is embarrassing. The world must absolutely be just, shaking their head at what's going on with this government, with our government.
And there's been a very significant development now here internally with regard to the investigation of the Russian hacking myth. The top FBI official, Bill Priestap, is cooperating with the Trump Justice Department. This is very, very significant. I'll go through it in steps.
Sure.
Get to know this name, Bill Priestap. Bill Priestap is the FBI Director of Counterintelligence.
Okay.
Bill Priestap was the immediate supervisor of FBI counterintelligence deputy Peter Strzok. Priestap is number one, Strzok was number two. The investigate into candidate Trump was counterintelligence op. That operation began in July of 2016. Bill Priestap would have been in charge along with other FBI counterintelligence operations. FBI Deputy Peter Strzok was specifically in charge of the Trump counterintel op. However, Strzok would be reporting to Bill Priestap on every detail and couldn't, according to structure anyway, make a move without Priestap's approval. On March 20th, 2017, congressional testimony, James Comey was asked why the FBI director did not inform congressional oversight about the counterintelligence op that began in July 2017. Comey said he did not tell congressional oversight he was investigating Trump because the director of counterintelligence suggested he not do so. Very important detail.
Definitely.
FBI Director Comey was caught entirely off guard by the first 3 minutes of questioning about this line of issue. Oversight protocol requires the FBI director to tell the Congressional Intelligence Gang of Eight of any counterintel ops. The Gang of Eight has oversight into these ops at the highest level of classification at the time. This was the group, a lot of very familiar faces. Based on what we know, what surfaced recently, we can see why the FBI would want to keep it hidden. They were running a counterintel operation against a presidential candidate. As FBI agent Peter Strzok said, it was an insurance policy. Agent Strzok to FBI attorney Page, his paramour, I want to believe the path you threw out for a conversation in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected. But I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. So James Comey is telling Congress the reason he didn't inform the statutory oversight Gang of Eight was because Bill Priestap, Director of Counterintelligence, recommended he not do it. That's called creating a fall guy. FBI Director James Comey is ducking responsibility in March 2017 by blaming FBI Director of Counterintelligence Bill Priestap for not informing Congress of the operation that began in July of 2016, 9 months prior, but realized, of course, Comey was his boss. Priestap would have needed to authorize Peter Strzok to engage with Christopher Steele over the Russian dossier. Priestap would have needed to approve the underlying documents that were used for both FISA applications, June, July, and September, October. Bill Priestap would be the person to approve of paying or reimbursing Christopher Steele for the Russian dossier used in their counterintelligence operation and subsequent FISA application. Without Bill Priestap involved, approvals, etc., the entire Russian Trump counterintelligence operation doesn't happen. Comey's testimony is also evidence of Priestap's importance. In addition, when Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates testified with James Clapper, she too spoke of the importance of Priestap as her liaison and contact within the FBI on the counterintelligence operation. Yates never mentioned Peter Strzok, not once. What we got here is him going over to the Justice Department, seeing he was being set up to be the fall guy, Louisa, because of his centrality in the case. The whole charade is falling apart.
Well, Jim, it looks like they're actually using his work as a spy. He wasn't a spy. They're trying to say he was a spy, but he was openly investigating Russia. So he wasn't a spy just because he was investigating him. He worked for the FBI. So they're trying to actually use, like you said, a fall guy. They're trying to use what he did, what investigation he did into Russia by saying he was a spy.
Well, let me.
I don't know if it's true. I mean, I think that's a.
No, Louisa, I meant about Priestap, that he has gone over to the Department of Justice because they were setting him up as a fall guy.
Yeah, I know.
This is a key player.
Right,
yeah, the next story, right, about this Carter Page.
Exactly.
This Carter Page thing is ridiculous. They were claiming he was a foreign spy when he'd actually already been working undercover for the FBI. In other words, he was still working undercover for the FBI, only now he was supposed to be a Russian spy. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right.
I'm telling you, this whole thing is getting worse and worse.
Well, with Priestap and with him, they were both set up. So this is the point I was trying to make.
Well, Carter Page was a willing part of it. I don't have any doubt.
Right.
Now we're going to get our news directly from the CIA, not even filtered by intermediaries in the news, because the former CIA director has been hired as a paid contributor to NBC and MSNBC. This is about as embarrassing as it gets, Louise. This guy's one of the greatest liars of all time. CIA chief made his first appearance in his new role as senior national security and intelligence analyst on Meet the Press Sunday. Promptly took the opportunity to accuse Nunes of being exceptionally partisan and abusing his role to protect Trump, when it was Brennan who was abusing his role to undermine Trump and to attempt to destroy his candidacy. I mean, this is just outrageous to have persons who are as corrupt as John Brennan representing what was once a respectable news organization.
Right.
We also have the interesting development that Anthony Weiner's laptop turns out to have an address book that includes George Soros, the Rothschild journalists and professors. Dr. Ewan has published the list. I have it republished on my blog. Very significant. I mean, we have hundreds of names. 4 days ago, the address book of 639 names and their addresses and phone numbers was uploaded to Squawker. Included on the list are George Soros, Linda Rothschild, the CEO of E.L. Rothschild, a holding company she owns with her third husband, Sir Evelyn Robert de Rothschild, a member of the very powerful Rothschild family, Republican Party consultant Roger Stone. Note that both Soros and Rothschild are buddies of Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Secretary of State Hillary took orders from Soros on how to handle unrest in Albania. And you can see Hillary's email with Linda Rothschild, as you would expect, since Anthony Weiner is Jewish. There are innumerable Jewish names among the 639. Dr. Ewan sorted his contacts into 3 groups. Many have overlapping roles, but she did it with government officials, journalists, and academicians. It's quite a revealing list. Here we have the interesting technical development that China actually has shown the technical capability to intercept a missile in space 1 week after the United States failed to do that. So, China must not be underestimated, in my opinion, that their military and technical and scientific capabilities are very sophisticated and would appear to exceed those of the United States. But if we have this serious development regarding missiles, we have this absolute fantasy regarding this billionaire SpaceX Falcon wanting to transport a Tesla Roadster to Mars. I mean, it turns out to be a joke.
Yeah.
This is turning a comic book into news, Lisa. I mean, take a look at this landing here. That is total animation. This is completely ridiculous. I find it embarrassing. This kind of stuff is being put out there. I think it has to be a test of the credulity of the American people. Will we believe anything? And the answer is yes, we'll believe anything.
I think sadly, you're right on that, Jim. That's what I'm saying about earlier. I just wanted to make a comment about the this Anthony Weiner laptop. Boy, I mean, they couldn't have gotten what great, intel they got from it. And I mean, it's leading them right to the chicken house.
Yeah, I agree.
Very good.
I agree.
Very good. Very good.
Now, this is fairly startling, but it turns out that there appears to have been a false flag plan for the Super Bowl, but because it was exposed in advance, that they had to call it off. Philadelphia Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie and head coach Doug Peterson were listed as killed at the Super Bowl 52 by Wikipedia. The only problem, both coaches are still alive, and Super Bowl 52 kickoff doesn't even start for a few hours. So his Wikipedia page said he died February 4th at the U.S. Bank Stadium in Minneapolis. I mean, this is outrageous, Louisa.
This is a sign that deep state is losing control of the narrative. This is it. It was because of that FISA memo, I believe, and I think we reported on it last that there was a false flag attack plan for that Super Bowl. But
there appears to have been. I don't see any way around it.
Right. But because of that memo, they didn't go with it. Yeah.
Coach Peterson listed as killed February 4th at the same location. Patriots coach Ernie Adams was also listed as deceased as of February 4th. I mean, this is just a bit much. Eagles running back Jay
Look at that.
Jaya is also included as dead, also at the U.S. Bank Stadium. The entries have since been corrected or erased. What's going on? No, anybody can edit a Wikipedia page, which is false, by the way. They claim that, but it isn't true.
Right.
It's nevertheless unusual, especially when the Super Bowl hasn't even started. This is very much like the donation websites going up for Sandy Hook the day before the event.
Jim, you find this in almost every false flag there is. You always find, an announcement of some kind of something that's irreversible, obviously, and usually like the death of somebody before the event happens. So they're not communicating. They're not getting the memos. The chain of communication is breaking down, and the people who are ultimately publishing these stories are not getting they're not getting their memo that the plug's been pulled on the operation.
Yeah, I'm not quite able to determine the scope of the alleged attack, what was going to be happening exactly.
Well, there was one report that there was going to be some, I think it was going to be, I'm not going to speculate. I did hear it was going to be like a sarin gas, or maybe it was like, or maybe it was some ricin attack, some kind of really lethal weaponized, chemical attack or something.
So
like
who was it going to be? It was going to be blamed on the Syrian government, on the Iranians?
They would have blamed it on Trump. I mean, Trump would have, poisoned his own people. I mean, come on, they would have done something like that.
Well, this is stupid beyond belief.
Truly.
Well, something that's fairly astonished me is that Bernie Sanders has been played by the Russian hacking meme. What's the president afraid of, he says. While seeking to protect American politics from further Russian intrusions, Bernie Sanders referred to the memo as a political stunt when it's anything but. Let's be absolutely clear. The release of this Republican staff memo is a blatant attempt by the House of Representatives and White House to disrupt the critically important investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election and the possible collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, Sanders wrote in a statement on Friday. The fact that congressional Republicans in the White House would release a memo the FBI itself says is misleading is a sad example of a political party putting partisanship above patriotism. That this memo was first released to right-wing news outlets like Fox and the Washington Examiner speaks to the political nature of this effort. According to news reports, President Trump himself has acknowledged the release of the memo was designed to disrupt Robert Mueller's investigation. It's critical the American people learn the truth about what happened in 2016, and no political stunt should interfere with a special counsel's work. What is the president afraid of? Trump has already admitted to NBC's Lester Holt that he fired Comey in an attempt to shut down the Russia investigation. Well, the FBI has opened investigation into both candidates. Comey only admitted in public to the investigation into Hillary Clinton during the final days of the campaign. So I published, when Bernie covers for the deep state, when its operations have been exposed so blatantly and instead suggests that the fraudulent Russian hacking scenario has merit, he has lost his credibility. Absolutely. I've been thinking about him in 2020, but this offers proof that he is not on top of the crimes of the FBI and the DOJ, even though they were protecting Hillary, who sabotaged his campaign. Not good.
No, Jim, I think it's good that you're covering this, bringing the story out, because this shows whose side Bernie really, who he's really working for, the deep state. And this is what we would have had, more of the same. I think that was the insurance policy for the DNC, was if Hillary didn't get in, Bernie would get in, and still have a puppet in there to do their bidding for him. Sadly.
I followed up with some additional posts. The Russian hacking meme was made up out of whole cloth by Robbie Mook and John Podesta within 24 hours of Hillary's concession speech. As two investigative journalists who followed the campaign reported in Shattered 2017. They did that to draw attention away from the incompetent campaign they'd run, from the contents of the WikiLeaks revelations that led directly to Pizzagate, where John Podesta is pedophile in chief, and from Hillary's own Russian entanglements. whereby she arranged for Russia to acquire 20% of U.S. uranium reserves via the Canadian company Uranium One for a contribution of $145 million to the Clinton Foundation, a transfer that also required the approval of then-President Barack Obama. If Ethel and Julius Rosenberg got the electric chair for sharing atomic secrets with the Soviet Union, what do Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama deserve for selling 20% of U.S. uranium reserve to Russia? You must have missed a memo. This fellow, Alan Shaw, and I went back and forth. He said, yes, I missed the memo. He suggests I'm being brainwashed by Fox, which is a bit ridiculous. You really are a silly person. Bernie was sabotaged by Hillary and the DNC, which gave her 13 primaries that he had won. Seth Rich, a DNC IT guy and Bernie supporter, became disillusioned and provided the DNC emails to Julian Assange via Craig Murray, an Intel analyst, UK ambassador, Uzbekistan, and rector of the University of Dundee. He and Assange both affirmed that they knew the leaker and that he was not Russian. Ray McGovern and Bill Benny, of veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity, verified that the files were downloaded directly from the DNC server at a rate too rapid for distant Russian hacking and done in the Eastern time zone. I'm sorry, but you need to get up to speed. Your life is being managed by the deep state and you don't even know it. And I suppose the dump truck that nearly derailed the Amtrak train was merely a coincidence too. Right. Now, what disillusions me, Louise, is that Bernie Sanders doesn't seem to understand these elementary points. I said, the guy was positive. You are interesting. I said, give me your thoughts about 5 cases in which the deep state has attempted to pull the wool over our eyes. Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, Charlottesville, Las Vegas, and needless to add, JFK. I presented this talk in Seattle Sunday. But, Louisa, they wasted no time in taking it down for violent or graphic content. Well, there isn't any violent or graphic content. There's one point where I contrast the Boston bombing, you're peering through the smoke and their bodies lying there with missing arms and legs and there is no blood, which is, it's a physiological impossibility for arms and legs to be blown up by explosives and there be no blood, with what shows up, which is fake blood. Right. They may have, if they're using an AI program, maybe the image of fake blood was interpreted as graphic content, but is proving the whole thing was a charade. There is no violent or graphic content, only proof that Sandy Hook kits were fabricated out of photographs of older children when they were younger. That's as violent and graphic as it gets. They may have mistaken a slide showing fake blood in Boston for real blood. As soon as we have it up where YouTube can't ban it, I'll post a link to it right here. Right. What could be more powerful proof of the deep state than YouTube taking down a video of my dissection of its efforts to pull the wool over the eyes of the public with regard to Sandy Hook, the Boston Marathon, Charlottesville, Las Vegas, and JFK, where I present new and important proof of how the kids were fabricated at Sandy Hook out of photos of older kids when they were younger, that the brothers were framed in Boston, that 2 drivers plus 2 cars plus 2 takes equals totally fake in Charlottesville. Right. That Las Vegas was a movie with a pre-recorded soundtrack, special visual effects, and a crowd seated with crisis actors, where the obituaries are for a person who died in different states or on different dates or from different causes of death, and where the autopsy photos of JFK are not even of the body of JFK. Here's another stab at making my lecture available to the public, but bear in mind the deep state doesn't want you to see this. And now to continue with Las Vegas, Louisa, it's become simply absurd. The judge directed the Clark County coroner to release the autopsy reports, which he had refused to do. And then he released 58 autopsy reports that didn't have any names. And you can't tell who they're for. They don't seem to show the ballistic assessment. In other words, this is a complete flim-flam, And now you have him directing that one of these autopsy reports should be rescinded. This is for one Charleston Hartfield, an off-duty Las Vegas police officer, was killed. The husband of plaintiff Veronica Hartfield. The ruling by District Judge Richard Schiotti also barred the newspaper and the AP from further reporting on Hartfield's autopsy details. This is bizarre. A Review Journal editor-in-chief Keith Moyer said the newspaper would file an emergency appeal of Q-ANON's decision to the Nevada Supreme Court. These reports are important public records. Previous rulings have held these records must be accessible to the public. Here is the newspaper's attorney confirming she filed the emergency appeal. The judge's decision after more than 2 hours of argument, during which attorney Anthony Sigro contended the widow's privacy concerns far outweighed the public's right to know. He also said the Review Journal only sought records in the first place to sell newspapers. They can report all they want on the happenings of the event so long as they don't trample on the privacy rights of individuals, Segro said. McCletchie called Segro's comments about newspaper sales strange criticism. She argued that despite the anguish Hartfield's widow and other victims have experienced, the First Amendment still applies. This is settled law, Louisa. These are public records, and the individual does not have overriding privacy rights, and they can't even figure out which of these 58 is supposed to be his. So, it's all completely ridiculous.
Yeah, Jim, doesn't the coroner also hold, isn't he also a bonded individual? Isn't he an oath taker in which he could be court-martialed if he's shown to commit fraud in any way?
Oh, it's going to happen. This whole thing is falling apart. This is just completely ludicrous. I mean, it's making a total joke of the whole situation. It's increasingly obvious.
Right.
Now the judge rules the coroner can enter the newsroom against federal law to seize and destroy the autopsy report. Unconstitutional ruling violates the Privacy Protection Act of 1980, which protects journalists and newsrooms from being raided by the government. Intel Hub, may I say, is doing quite good work on this.
Okay.
A major newsroom battled the widow of a slain Metro police officer in a wrapped-up district courtroom Friday after the plaintiff filed a motion to have her husband's autopsy report sealed from the general public's viewing against state law. What in the world is going on here? For all I can tell, it's an insurance scam. She's going to file an insurance claim, and she doesn't want the insurance company to have access to the autopsy report because you see that there's something totally wrong here. Nobody died there. Completely fraudulent. The Privacy Protection Act of 1980 protects journalists and newsrooms from having to turn over to law enforcement any work products, documentary materials, and sources before they've been disseminated to the public. So things like this can't happen. Yet even so, the judge carried on with the shenanigans. Additionally, the ruling bars the Las Vegas Review Journal, the AP, and over 100 other news outlets from further reporting on Hartfield's autopsy details, which surely contains some information is significant. Now listen to this. They got 58 with no identification as to who they are. To avoid publishing his, were they supposed to suppress all 58 because they don't know which of the 58? I mean, this is some kind of bizarre stunt.
No, Jim, I think what this is a scam. And you're right. I'm not so sure. It could be insurance, but I think this is also the since the judge is allowing this, it looks like to me they want some signatures on these autopsy reports so that they could go to the straw man account at the U.S. Treasury Department and access steal funds.
Well, it's all pretty bizarre.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
As a caveat, email correspondence between the Clark County Coroner's Office and investigative reporter John Cullen revealed the coroner may have had some type of heads up. He may have been complicit in arranging this whole fiasco. In fact, Clark County Public Communications spokesman Dan Cullen told Mr. Cullen last Thursday, told Cullen last Thursday in an email, the coroner will not be releasing the autopsy records because an upcoming court hearing may change things. So he doesn't want to release them because they don't exist, Louisa. There are none of these. And here's something Mona Alexa Presley discovered, which is the crime map for those square mile around the shooting from 8 p.m. the night of the event to 8 p.m. the following day, and read from the bottom up. Other disturbance, assault and battery, other disturbance, assault and battery, burglary, stolen motor vehicle, burglary, malicious destruction, other disturbance, recovered motor vehicle, other disturbance, robbery. No shooting, much less any mass shooting. This whole thing is fraudulent, as I've proven again and again.
Yeah,
and here's the image that sums it all up. Researcher can't find anybody who died in Las Vegas massacre. I survived crowds on demand, even though I've got a hole in my head and in my throat. Louisa, it's
Right.
just,
Well, Jim, you didn't bring that picture, did you? The makeup picture I did, where, you can make it look very realistic. I mean, I used to do that special effects makeup and I would use real animal parts and real, like go to the deli, not the deli, to the butcher. And I would use real chicken and bones and, meat and things like that. And the point was to train the emergency personnel on triage and also in the emergency room. But it was, I never, at that time, I never heard of these false flags and that they would use this kind of technique and strategy for false flags and creating a fake event. This is what I'm talking about with the Q post, Jim. I mean, 60-40, let's have it all. Just tell the truth, get it out. It's never going to be cleaned up, Jim. If we don't have full disclosure, we don't have the truth. But thank you for red pilling that guy, because he did a great job. And it looks like you really perked his interest and won his, I think you removed some doubt the man had in your comments as you were, again, just going over the
a
evidence.
nation of change. It's just appalling to me that Bernie Sanders does, at this point in time, not have a better grasp of the realities of the situation. Your point about him may be exactly right, that Bernie was just another deep state stooge.
That's going to be a shock to a lot of people, because really everybody thought that, Bernie Sanders was going to be the, more like the new age kind of, candidate. And he was saying all the right things, but, he was, unfortunately, the DNC it's just corrupted to the core. I mean, you can't trust anyone that comes out of the DNC these days. It's such a sickness that's bestowed upon our country at this point, Jim.
Well, there we have the short take for today, Louisa.
Well, this is it. And Jim, I do hope you feel better. Get well and get your rest. It will pass.
Thank you.
It will pass eventually. Folks, I want to remind you this is a viewer-supported media. And if you'd like to support Goldfish Report, you can go to thegoldfishreport.com. You can follow us on Facebook, who is also censoring us. But we're still, with your help and your participation, we can spread this information far and wide. So we rely on our viewers to do their part, because I know you want to. Our viewers want to, they watch our reports, Jim, because they want to feel like they can do something themselves. They want to know how they can participate. And one of the ways they can participate is by sharing this information, spreading it on Facebook, and also contributing and becoming a patron of the Goldfish Report. So those are two ways that they can do their part while we do ours. And of course, the deep state's not happy about the kinds of things that we're reporting on, although it's already out in the alternative media. So it's not like we're really analyzing the information that's out. We're not the ones really, well, you have with your books, you have been reporting on these false flags and going through the evidence of them and the reality of them, which is a hard pill for people to swallow. People have to get past this misconception that the government would never do anything to harm us. And I think once you start to understand that, you're going to see the world quite differently, and not put up with it, because everybody is being passive, or they're just ignoring it completely because they're tired of politics. They don't feel like anything's ever going to change, but you have to realize it's our responsibility collectively to make that change. We have to do it. We have to. And Winston Shrout, in one of our previous reports, told us how to do it with the referendums, and people have to self-organize and get that done. And if you don't like people who are in office, hold a referendum and a recall and referendum and get them out. We have to do the work. We have to stop being complacent and being codependent and waiting for other people to solve the problems, because ultimately it's our responsibility. Jim, thank you so much today, and thanks for all of your stories. I do think that there was a lot of new things that we talked about today that are still revelations. I want everyone to just realize, this whole thing with Q is the overall important message is that there are operations going on. We saw the evidence with the flight, the and we've shown evidence before. There's lots of other examples of this, and I'm not going to go into every single one of them. But the whole idea is that, to keep an eye out on these emergency broadcast alerts, because they're there because President Trump can't go through the mainstream media to get his message out. So that's why he's using the emergency broadcast system. So just realize that, and not to worry, that their plan is to try to keep the peace as much as possible. So they're going to be as careful as possible. Jim, did you have any other comments you want to make?
No. We're good. We're
okay.
Good.
All right. Well, Jim, thanks so much. Feel better. We'll see you next week for another edition of POTUS, our POTUS report. This is, and I knew last week I misquoted it. This is our week 56 POTUS report. And so this was a review of the POTUS agenda. So folks, thanks for viewing. We're going to have other specials this week. We have another special message from St. Germain with Dr. Scott Warner and Winston Shrout. We will have that this week for you as well. And of course, our Friday Country Roads with Winston Shrout. So stay tuned. We have more reports for you this week. And we want to thank our viewers. We want to thank everyone who sends us links and sends us stories to repost on our news page and to be included in our reports. And we also want to thank our viewers who do make contributions, because without you, we can't keep GoldFish Report going. So we appreciate your help and your support. And having said that, want to wish you, again, get well, Jim, just to get your rest, and it will pass. And to everybody else, we'll see you all next time. So thank you for viewing, and this concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.
Okay.